And welcome to this episode of Let's Talk Forensic Psychology. We're really pleased to have Dr. Cory Walters-Wright with us in this episode. Cory works both at Oxleas Trust and Canterbury University. Congratulations on recently getting, I've only found out recently you've got your doctorate. You might have got it a while ago. So congratulations on that.
Thank you.
And so would you mind telling us a bit about your sort of route into forensic psychology?
Yeah, sure. So my route was probably wasn't very straightforward. Actually, I wasn't necessarily quite academic in school. Actually, I played football. Until I was probably the age of 18. I wanted to be a professional footballer. That was the ambition, and that was the dream. And then it didn't really work out in that sense. And I found myself ended up going to university. One of my courses at sixth form was PE, and I really enjoyed the psychology aspect of that, which resulted in me kind of wanting to pursue that in the future. The difficulty that I had was because of the studies or the subjects that I was studying. It meant that a lot of universities didn't allow me to take up psychology. So actually a lot of them offered me sports science as an alternative. The only university that offered me to do psychology straight was the University of Kent, because that university allowed me to pick psychology as long as I got the grades of AAA, which I did, or the equivalent of. And then I went into psychology to do my 3 years BSc. And really at the end of my BSc, actually, the ambition necessarily wasn't to become a qualified psychologist. Actually, I just wasn't ready to finish university. So I went to my careers advisor and I asked them. I'd been doing an honorary placement at SLAM, Leo Community Service, as an honorary psychologist for about 6 months.
You might be saying what that is, what SLAM is.
Yeah, so South London and Maudsley Trust. That placement was in the community in Kennington, near Elephant and Castle, and it was focused on early first episode of psychosis community team, and it was really interesting. It was really interesting just to kind of be in that environment to understand what it was like. And I think for me, the standout aspect is a lot of the individuals that I was coming across were like me, were people that I could really resonate with, were people that were from places that I resonate with. I grew up in South London on an estate, and I just started to really think about these people that I were coming across and that were so similar to me, and that I just really wanted to try and help. The difficulty that I had was that I didn't know how to get into a position to be qualified to help these individuals. And I think that was the blockage in my journey, not really understanding and not quite necessarily having the opportunity to understand the field entirely. And for me, actually, forensic psychology was never really on my radar. It was purely clinical psychology. The only reason that being is because I felt like that was the only feasible route for me. So now going back to speak to my careers advisor, I explained my experience, and I was really interested in research. So I really wanted to do a statistical and research methods masters. When she explained the
Sorry, I hear people say I really love stats, and I'm like, what on earth?
You know what it was? I think it was where I got all my grades. How I picked up all my grades. It was the stats modules. It wasn't necessarily essays or anything like that. It was the stats modules. So I was really interested in research from that perspective, and maybe it's because I was good at the numbers aspect, and I really like SBS and stuff like that. Yeah. So
It's a great role model for people who don't do well at school and then you like stats. Great role model for people.
So I spoke to my careers advisor, and she said, well, actually, the forensic course allows you to do all of these aspects around the stats course, because actually it was only really one module which specified it, and then you got to pick the rest of your module. But actually, it was BPS accredited. The difficulty that it was at the University of Kent. Actually, it was quite a rigorous process to get into the course. Interview, I had to justify my grades, why I got certain grades, why I didn't get certain grades, and so forth and so forth. But I got on, and by the end of it, actually, I didn't even know that I had my stage one. I didn't. That wasn't anything I knew. So again, through pure luck, I was playing five-a-side football with my lecturers. So then my lecturers in my course knew that I played football. So they used to invite me to five-a-side football with the lecturers for the course. And one of their wives was there, and she said, "Oh, Cory, what are you going to do at the end of your masters? I'm coming to the end now." And I said, "I have no clue. I've applied for like 50 assistant psychologist jobs. I get rejected every single time. I have no clue." And she said, "Well, there's 5 assistant posts at a small hospital near Dover. I'm from London. I really wanted to go home, but I applied and I got that, which meant that I had to stay up in Canterbury for an additional year and a half, 2 years, but still on my radar was solely the clinical course. That was the only way that seemed feasible for me to become qualified. Didn't understand about doctoral training, didn't understand about BPS. And after I think I applied, so I finished my master's in 2017 and I applied for the doctorate just to have a go. And then I got an interview at UCL, totally fumbled my interview, crumbled under the pressure. And then I was back at square one. But then I went into I applied for an assistant post at Oxleas NHS Trust at Rochester prisons, and that kind of really changed my perspective, because we've got probably one of the biggest forensic directorates in and around the country in terms of the various different services that we have. And actually, I started to really understand qualification, especially into the forensic field. So what they do at Oxleas is they offer a bursary scheme. So what they will do is they'll offer to pay your fees, but they'll offer you placements in and around the trust to ensure that you get qualified. I think at that time there were about maybe 5. When I applied, I think in total we ended up having around 16 trainees in and around the various different routes. The great thing about it, various different services. Sorry, the great thing about it was that my experience was really vast because of the training. So I started in HMP Swell side at the provision pipe, which was a really different experience than I'd ever had before. I'd always worked in Inreach Secondary Psychological Services before that. I'd say always, but it was a year of an assistant post.
Do you mind just saying what those jobs are, because they're obviously known to us but not to everybody else. So
yeah,
what a pipe is and what an Inreach service is.
So an Inreach service is kind of like a secondary mental health service within a prison. It's similar to like a mental health outreach service in the community. It serves for individuals potentially struggling with their difficult mental health, maybe hearing voices, psychosis, difficulties around anxiety. Now, we came under the secondary aspect. So we were the psychological services. So we worked through a single point of access. So everything would go through the mental health team, the nurses, and then those individuals that they felt were appropriate to kind of work with us, i.e. around traumas in particular, would then kind of be filtered through to us, and difficulties around personality as well. Now the pipe was, we were very separate from the prison, really separate. Didn't necessarily even feel like we was a part of the system per se. Actually, we work on a system that's confidential from the prison. If the clients don't allow us to say what's going on for them, we're bound by confidentiality. Now going on to the pipe was completely different. It's based on joint working, operationally led, and NHS led, which was completely different. And it meant that I had to really learn to navigate my feelings when working with operational staff, because, I had a certain perspective, which was actually, now reflecting on it, was unfair because of what the criminal justice system may represent, because of maybe my own difficulties or my own experiences were growing up. So I felt quite separate, and actually systemically it felt like the NHS's goals were maybe a bit different than the criminal justice system. But actually my experience in the pipe taught me a lot of lessons, and it's quite different. Actually, I was really in awe of the operational staff and how they were able to integrate and work with the clients, and I learned a lot from that placement. And it really meant that I started to understand the prison system rather than just solely the NHS system, which has gone with me all the way through my qualification and now my role that I'm in right now. So kind of following on from that, and a really good thing about that, and I just really want to highlight the supportive nature of Oxleas, is that they knew we were volunteering as trainees. So the basis of the bursary is that we're not employed as assistants, so we're not paid. we're not paid in any capacity. They pay for our fees. But what they do is they offer placements and they try to ensure that it's voluntary. So you're supernumerary. So your sole focus of going into placement is to get the relevant experience for you to qualify. And that's really important when thinking about maybe getting a job, an assistant job, maybe to survive, because actually the needs of the service may take precedent before your training. So now, going on to my next placement, which was the Bracton Centre, split with working in LPP community service. I'll give you a definition of that.
We're really familiar with the terms, but nobody else will be.
So the Bracton Centre was a medium secure unit. The sole basis is kind of to work with mentally disordered clients. A lot of those individuals, all of those individuals would be sectioned into some capacity, 37, 41, really depending upon rulings from the judge. And in the community, it was another offender personality pathway service as well. So a lot of the main basis of that was to consult with probation officers in regards to the kind of assistance or the management of complex clients in the community, and just thinking about pathways.
So those numbers you mentioned, they're sections of the Mental Health Act. So people would be sent to hospital instead of prison.
Yeah.
Secure place. So
yeah.
The different sections of the Mental Health Act.
Mm-hmm. Or whilst in prison, they would be sent to a secure hospital, depending upon if they got unwell or identified treatment needs. And then so to come into the end of that I think that was the whirlwind to kind of getting qualified and doing my doctorate. I think going into what a trust like the Oxleas really did help me understand. I think without their support, probably I wouldn't have been able to complete my doctorate. I don't think the doctorate would have been feasible for me. I mean, doctorate fees were 10k per year. That would have been 20k for me to qualify. Whilst additionally, they supported me with bank shifts. So in my second year, I was working as in a bank capacity at Swellside 1 day per week, holding on to my cases. In addition to that, they gave me weekend work at the Bracton Centre to help support me when the Band 7 psychologist then moved across to a different job. So they just said that you can kind of take over in that capacity because you've been working there. And actually, I clinically lead HMP Belmarsh and HMP Thameside.
Excellent. And
that is so impressive. Like, seriously, congratulations. That's very cool.
It is really impressive. And you mentioned the LPP, so that's the London Prison Partnership.
Yeah, partnership pathway. And again, I think for me, it's the insight into what my experience has given me, is the insight into so many different services within forensics. I think it would have been so easy, and I think it is so easy to get so comfortable and become comfortable in your role without really exploring what it's like within different settings, without understanding the various different legislation, that kind of the commissioning aspects. I mean, Oxleas has been really great in terms of teaching me all of these aspects whilst I've grown as a clinician. And that's I think that was a turning point for me in terms of qualifying, and that stemmed into the video that we produced in regards to increasing diversity and showing people that it is possible. I think I had to take a step back in terms of my life and knowing that, I wouldn't be paid for 2 years, but knowing that probably my future would be brighter. And now I've had a lot more opportunities around various different aspects because of what I do now.
I was just wondering how then, with the doctorate, how did you find that in terms of covering, so that people could understand, you cover the same sort of competencies on the doctorate as you would as if you were on stage 2 or one of the other routes to qualifying. So you cover all the same competencies.
Yeah, we do. So it's set by us completing 2 portfolios, a practice portfolio and a research portfolio. The practice portfolio is made up of 6 pieces of work. So we review our 4 placements. So there are 4 placements. So they're set to look at 6 monthly placements to kind of look at how you've achieved each competency. So core role 1, which is psychological practice, core role 2, which is research, core role 3, which is communicating psychological
knowledge.
knowledge, and core role 4, which is training. And essentially, we have to achieve a certain amount of days across our 2 years, and we have to document that and highlight that across the placement reports. Alongside that, we have 2 further pieces of work, which looks at a case study for a piece of psychological work with a client, and a training package from start to finish in a document. And then we have a research portfolio, which is made up of 6 chapters, an introduction chapter. I did 2 research studies, a psychometric critique, and a systematic review, and a conclusion.
I was thinking, I wanted to say something and I don't quite know how to say it, but that's not going to stop me from saying it. So forgive me if it comes out really clumsy, but I guess this is the point of not hiding away from these things. I felt really struck by how you spoke about how going in, you were really reflective about how your experiences was, you were affected by the systemic situation within the prison. And I think that was really brave to say. And also we should highlight that you said it, and that shouldn't be ignored here. And I would just like to say thank you for raising it.
Yeah, I mean, I think diversity issues and like naming just my experiences of being a Black man, and my socioeconomic kind of background, you know, the elements of marginalization, poverty, you know, what it means necessarily to kind of grow up in a South London estate or area. Per se, with my experiences, I think one of the reflections that I had when I first went into prison system is that I felt like I connected, or I understood the individuals within the prison more than I understood the individuals that I was working alongside, and that was poignant to me. I think one of the key supervisions that I had was with one of my great supervisors, Clyde Wright, who kind of I highlighted that, you know, sometimes even the way sometimes I shook people's hands and the way I was able to integrate with people so easily within that setting meant that I felt sometimes under suspicion as a Black man, you know, and that it didn't necessarily feel uncomfortable. I felt as though it was hard to say. I think I went through necessarily a stage of, you know, this is what it means to be a prototypical psychologist. And I'm scared to kind of come away from that prototype because maybe I won't be accepted. But actually, as I started to grow in my career, I became more comfortable with who I am, and how I understand psychology through my lens, and how I'm able to relay that back into the work that I do with the individuals within prison. So I then started to talk about, you know, the concepts of compassion focused therapy, or, you know, trauma work, but through that lens of the language that I understand because of where I come from, and maybe how things can be delivered. Whereas before, I didn't want to really rock the boat. I was really nervous about, you know, being identified as an outsider. But, you know, ultimately, I think systemically, you know, my experiences of the criminal justice system growing up, and what the criminal justice system represented, really did impact how I felt going into the criminal justice system. And also the area that I work in. You know, the area that I work in is very close to where I grew up. So coming across people in, you know, hospitals or lifer prisons or remand prisons, that, you know, that was really difficult for me to sit with, when, you know, people would say, Cory, how are you doing? I was like, oh wow. But, you know, I got more comfortable naming it at work, and being comfortable with who I am and who I was. And probably that's really sometimes a bit difficult for people from various different backgrounds to kind of necessarily be comfortable who they are within the psychological field, because of maybe what it represents, and how it's populated.
I think lots of the stuff, I'm very nearly qualified and I've had enough of practice diaries, so even just the word sends me into shudders. But the experience of qualifying teaches us to be reflective, and I don't think there should be boundaries to what our reflections are about and what we share. So if there is an experience that we have had, people, whoever, needs to be able to hear that, and we need to be able to share that, because it makes us who we are as people, but also who we are as practitioners and what we bring to the role.
I think it's so true. I think diversity, race, aspects that make people feel uncomfortable, sometimes is difficult to approach and explore. I think what happened within psychology, and especially within our department, is that, Black Lives Matter, the Black Lives Matter movement happened. People got more comfortable talking about race. And I think within our department, especially when I think about some of the working groups and the projects that we've got going on, actually people were comfortable sitting with that uncomfortable conversation. And it's easy, and because of that, I think people were more open to putting it on the agenda, talking about and being curious. I think ultimately sometimes people want to be experts in everything. And I often say to people, we won't be. So if we have a client that we don't necessarily understand culturally, we need to probably be curious about how to understand them and look at them through that cultural lens and ask them, even though we are the perceived expert in the moment, assessing actually these things mean a lot to people. And I think, yeah, so as I've gone in my career, I've got more and more comfortable with who I am personally, and that embedding into the work that I do every day.
And you're exactly the sort of person we're trying to attract into the forensic psychology field. So it's great to have you here, that you will become the norm, and that people will see that and see you and think, well, I could do that because you've done it. So I think that, you will be such a great role model for people. I'm sure you already are. To see that, it's just really great, because I was wondering when you were saying about going into clinical and what the reasoning was. And I guess one of them is that you get funded training, and that is difficult if you're going to the forensic route. It's not getting that same funding on your training for a doctorate anyway.
And I think that is it. I think that's the fear, and that's often what holds a lot of people back from going into forensics as a field. Ultimately it will be financially just surviving within your environment. Often a lot of people from diverse backgrounds haven't got the luxury of working, just doing their placement and not thinking about their lives. When I was training, I worked as a HCA, long days on a Sunday and a Saturday. I trained during COVID. So I played football semi-professionally, so that was funding a lot of my ability to navigate through training, and then that stopped twice. So I was working long days as a HCA. Really started to understand the nursing field just because of how many shifts I was doing, and actually just to get enough money to pay my rent, pay just for my card, pay to get to work. So that after those 2 years, I was very, very happy just to finish up.
And now you're leading a service at Belmarsh. That is very impressive.
Do you know what? I think it was me just taking chances, and actually, the lead of my service. So I got my job. I think I finished in October 21 all of my placements. I got my first job in about March, and they waited till October for me. I finished my Vivas and everything in 2022, but I was working as a band 7 on a preceptorship. So I was being paid at a band 6, and I was working as a band 7. And then I just took a punt. I felt like I'd kind of met the kind of requirements of that band 7 kind of role for a little while, because I'd really been open to experiences in my training. I felt confident enough to kind of take chances, being different spaces, understand what it necessarily meant to be a band 7. I'd supervised honorees, so I felt comfortable. So I applied for an AA role. Didn't get it, but the lead sat down and spoke to me, I think, in regards to just practicing. This is where you probably needed to kind of highlight and just explore a little bit more. And I think that rather than them just saying, no, Cory, you're just not ready, you haven't done enough time, what they said was that, we believe in you, you just need to believe in yourself enough in the interview. So I was almost nervous to even be in that interview. I almost thought I thought I was going to get in trouble for even applying for the role, because I think I'd been only so I hadn't even finished my Viva yet. I haven't even done my Viva. So I applied in about March for that first role. So I thought they were just interviewing me because I was about to get in trouble. But actually, I think one of the key things was that my head of psychology was really impressed that I had the confidence to put myself out there and say, like, no, you believe in yourself, so we believe in you. Let's try and look at where your experiences need to improve, how you can portray that in an interview at this level. And then my next AA role was the lead of Belmarsh and the lead of H&P Thameside, and I got it. But that was because, they didn't shut me down. They uplifted me. I had done a lot of the projects that would allow me to kind of be in that space. They just said, you need to be confident and highlight that in the interview. And that was enough for me to say, right, I'm going to get the next one.
So you work in prisons and you work at Canterbury University.
Yeah.
How do you balance the two?
Do you know what? I was approached by the head of the course, who I'd worked with, who kind of said, do you want to do this opportunity? Do you want this opportunity? We've got it, but I know you've just qualified. So I know that you probably want to really focus on your qualification, like your actual clinical work. So I signed up for half a day per week, and that's kind of linked around work. So massively around marking, video guided learning, lectures, answering discussion boards. I was offered to supervise, but I just didn't think I would have enough time. I'd supervised when I was doing my training. I had worked as a sessional lecturer at Roehampton, so that kind of gave me the experience to understand the process of academia, and just thought, well, there's something I liked, let me can kind of continue. So it really just works around my job. I do it a lot in the evenings. Right, so I'm marking papers at the minute for an assignment, just to kind of keep my foot in the door and just kind of understand if it's something I like and enjoy. Some advice that I was given is that when you qualify, try everything, see what you like, see where it lands, and see what you don't like, and then I'll kind of, as I go forward in my career, I think that will impact what I drop off, what I don't.
It's a good example of trying all these different things, and I think balancing working in prisons and hospitals and academia is a really nice balance to keep, like you say, a foot in each, although you need 3 feet to be in all of those places, but to have a sort of experience of all of those. And I think with working in academia is that you're keeping up to date with the current research and you're hearing what's going on, but then you're doing that in practice as well. So it's really inspirational to be able to do all of that. And you still play football as well?
Yeah, I do. I still play football. It keeps me fit. It keeps me
good for your mental health.
Good for my mental health. Keeps me relaxed. Keeps me fit. So yeah, because it's also really important to ensure that there's self-care. There's no point in working, and not just enjoying your life.
No, it's true. And what sort of feedback have you received from your colleagues then about the videos you've done and the way you're promoting forensic psychology and yourself?
Do you know what, the feedback's been great, and it's been really supported by the department. Everything. So the diversity video that we released was a project of our Tackling Diversity working group. Again, we commissioned a sports commercial agency to kind of film it, just to kind of try and spruce it up. So actually they were invested in the video as well. And I think what the positive aspect is that people are contacting me and I'm able to give them advice in regards to kind of how to get into the field, what to kind of look out for, and it's really important to think about those niche aspects that people don't really tell you. Like, you finish your BSc or you finish your master's, and you really think that you're meant to go in and become an assistant psychologist, and it becomes disheartening. Go and become a HCA. I worked in Topshop and I worked in O2 whilst in university. I shouldn't really become a HCA whilst I was in those environments. They would have given me exposure to psychologists. It would have given me paid relevant work throughout the entirety of my undergraduate degree and postgraduate, and actually that would have looked really favourable when thinking about interviews as
Yeah,
well.
it's a really good example. We had a person who was doing a placement with us in the prison, and she was working in Jane Norman at the weekends, and then a job came up in our visit centre at the weekend, so she was earning more there in our visit centre, helping with the visits, but given a relevant experience. So I think, like you, like a healthcare assistant role in a hospital is so such a great example of, because you can work in different wards, you can work in different environments, and that's such a really creative way. And I think the way you describe your experiences through your training is really, again, inspires people to think, oh, actually I can do that. That's the way I could get through it all, by having relevant jobs in the field, working in probation hostels, or finding something where you're working with a client group, but just in a different setting. And then you might find, actually, I want to work there instead of in a prison or a hospital.
Yeah. And do you know what, generally that's it. It's exposure to as many experiences as possible. But I think, again, it's what people know and don't know. So, for example, nobody told me that in the first day of my psych course. All of the the lectures that I did, they don't necessarily teach you how to become a psychologist. It gives you the foundations and the basis to maybe pass exams, or that relevant knowledge of what psychology is. And I think something around maybe courses, if you're not necessarily somebody that is going and exploring externally, maybe courses have a need or requirement to really tell people how to qualify and help them with that.
Yeah.
So have you experienced any barriers then to your work, apart from the funding, which is is a barrier for most people? Have you had any other sort of barriers you've experienced?
One of the barriers is more sometimes feeling good enough. I'd say that my experiences with some supervisors haven't been fantastic, which meant that it meant that I didn't necessarily think it as viable, or I didn't necessarily have the self-confidence to want to take qualification forward. I would say that's probably a massive barrier for a lot of individuals trying to get into qualification. Just feeling good enough to kind of take that step forward and say, actually, I have to do what's right for me, what's maybe not necessarily right for the service. And I think that's something that we do really well in Oxleas. A lot of assistants maybe come in and are really nervous about having a 12-year fixed term contract. And I say, well, no, like the role of the assistant, and I got this advice and it was great advice. The role of the assistant is to help build you to become a qualified psychologist, not for it to be your permanent job forever. So utilize the experience that you can from our service, and we can definitely kind of maneuver and go forward with that.
Your assistants get a 12-month contract to begin with, a fixed contract. That's interesting.
So we only give, in our department, we only give 12 months fixed terms, but they all get 12 months at the same time. So the aim is that, even when they finish, they can go, if they don't go into training, they can go into other posts in and around the department. But the aim is to say to them, utilize this time well, but whilst you're here, apply for, we want you to get onto a doctorate course. We want you to get onto a qualification course, and we will support you to do so.
Because lots of psych assistants only stay 6 to 8 months anyway, because that's what they're trying to do, is gain a lot of different experience. So actually by doing that, that might be that they'll stay a little bit longer rather than leave earlier, knowing that they've got that contract. And I was thinking about what you said about your time at school and how you sort of overcame that. You said, you didn't do well at school, and then you get A's and get into university and get a master, a master's degree and then a doctorate. So how do you think you managed that?
I think in school, so I wasn't like not. So I mean, I was still academic. I just didn't necessarily take school as serious as. Actually, the best way to put it is school didn't necessarily seem viable to me as a route to any form of success. That would probably be the best way to kind of look at it. I'd really focused on sports. I could always get by in school. So I got I think around 12 GCSEs A to C in some capacity. And I think English was at a C. So I wouldn't say I was A stars across the board, but I could get through. And I think for me, what maybe stood out for me, and I think that followed me into university, I wasn't massively good at essays. I got pulled up on my essays quite a lot in my first and second year. And like I said, I liked stats because I brought up my grades to something respectable. I think I continued in my education because I was competitive. A lot of people said I couldn't, so I wanted to. You know, you say I can't, and I'll prove that I can. And then and I was then started to become more open to feedback. So rather than really being quite sensitive to it, I started to be open to feedback so that I could improve, because I knew if I wanted to be qualified in that capacity, I needed to be open to be getting critiqued in some capacity, which made things easier. So when I'm critiqued now, I'm okay with it. But I've drastically improved, for example, my writing, just because I'm competitive and I really don't want to get pulled apart in a court hearing because I'm
Nobody does.
Yeah, so I would say that I think for where I went to school, academics wasn't on the minds of a lot of us as young boys. You know, some of us did okay, some of us did really well. I went to not a great school in terms of reputation, flooded with gangs, as school in Lewisham. So I mean, it wasn't necessarily, academics again wasn't on our minds in regards to a way of navigating and getting out of our situations. You know, it's just not. I didn't have many role models. I didn't know any psychologists. One of the questions that I was asked in one of my interviews is that, you know, what is the difference between a clinical psychologist and a youth worker? I said, well, actually, youth workers have done more for me than any clinical psychologist that I knew. And that's, I think that's poignant to understand potentially why, you know, a lot of young men, black men, are not in necessarily the field, because, you know, if you haven't got many people as role models or people that have had positive impacts on your life, potentially it's not something you would even think about going into.
That's so interesting. And I thought what you said about the interviews was really true about, you know, it's a different skill to be able to sell yourself and point yourself out at an interview and, yeah, sell yourself in a way that you wouldn't normally do and you don't feel confident or competent doing, or that imposter syndrome is sort of a skill that you don't really need in the job that you're probably being interviewed for, because if they asked you to present about the service, you'd be able to do that really easily, I assume. And then, you know, that's what you'd be doing in the job rather than sitting and talking about how great you are. And how, you know, so I think the person who comes up with an alternative to putting people through interviews will be very popular.
I'm sure
A different way to put people into the jobs that, you know, they're probably very capable of doing, but they're just not good at interviews. It's a whole different skill, isn't it?
No, definitely. I entirely. I think that level of confidence that I may have on a day-to-day basis sometimes won't come through in an interview, merely because potentially I don't necessarily want to be viewed as overconfident in an interview. And my feeling is that will go against you. But actually, what I've learned through just interviewing more and more, and being a lot of the time being an interviewer, actually, I want people to sell themselves. I want you to tell me how good you are. I want you to tell me the projects, even when I know you, because, you know, when we do the marketing system, often a lot of the time I used to think, well, they know what I can do. You know, what's going on? And actually, you know, we need you to sell yourself just as you would if you didn't know us. If I didn't know you did these great projects, tell me about them. Tell me about your progression, and that really has helped, and it's helped with, you know, my public speaking, going into different environments. For example, I went and worked, sat on a round table in government the other day, and, you know, to feel
that entail a round table with the government.
Well, Sorry, I just throw out these.
You just drop that right at the end.
Yeah, we all know what that means.
So it was a Labour initiative to review the Equalities Act based on difficulties around COVID. And so they got various different professionals from different fields to kind of discuss key aspects that they can implement in legislation and policy to assist with difficulties around diversity. Which was quite positive, but actually probably shows for me the progression that I've probably been able to make in feeling comfortable to be in that space and not feel like an imposter, actually to feel like a key contributor.
And that's so important, isn't it? I remember David Lammy, when he was doing his review, came in and spoke to a group of people in the prison, and they were so relaxed talking to him as if he was somebody, you know, if he was a member of staff that they'd known for ages. He had a really good skill of making people just feel comfortable to say, and told them they could say whatever they wanted. And I think that's how he achieved so much in his review, because he put people at ease to tell them their experiences. That's what he wanted to hear. But you could see the quality of his report based on the fact that he worked so hard to go and, you know, collect the data and get people, put them at ease enough to talk about their experiences, and that's what they need to hear. And it's great that you're involved in these sort of things, because again, we're trying to really want psychologists getting involved in politics and getting involved in giving their experiences. Is there anything else you wanted to talk about, Cory? Is there anything else we haven't covered?
No, I think we've covered a lot of it. I'd say, yeah, I think we've covered roots. We've thought about kind of, I've given a bit of an oversight into kind of how I've got into the field. Talked a bit about kind of diversity work. We are releasing a trauma-informed care training package, which is going to be really cool. Hopefully, and we're just going to need to get it authorised by the Ministry of Justice. Which we've just finished up filming,
So who will that be released to?
On YouTube. So it'll be on our YouTube page. We have a YouTube page, which I'm holding on to at the minute.
How do we find that? What do we type into YouTube?
Well, you can for the diversity video, you can do it working with diversity in forensics, and for the trauma-informed care video, it's trauma-informed care within prisons. And that's got the trailer up at the minute, but we're going to be releasing the various different parts as and when we get authorization.
That's really good, and we'll put links to that in the show notes as well.
Oh, that'd be great.
Yeah, that's really fantastic. I mean, it's such an important aspect of the work we do.
Yeah. But yeah, I think that's generally it. Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, thank you for coming.
It's been lovely. It's been great talking to you, and just remains for us to say, let's talk forensic psychology.